Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my August wrap up. I was actually really surprised because I went through a total of 16 books. Yeah, y'all, 16. 16, I think, has been the most I've ever read, and I hit that limit when I was doing the last Battle of the Bands readathon a couple months back, so I was shocked that I actually hit that same number for the month of August. Let's get the DNFs right out of the way. I had a total of 5 DNFs. First one is The Turn of Ellie Black by Amiko Jean. Number 2, Roses and Rot by Kat Howard. This was my biggest disappointment. I had such high hopes for this because of the story, the premise. I mean, it's like it's a dark academia, has to do with an art academy. They have like sisters going to the same art university. Both of them they're both artistic in different ways. I believe one is a painter and one was a dancer. And that's like up my alley. I loved the premise, and it just wasn't deep enough. It didn't have enough depth, and that's the reason why I DNF'd this. The Darkness Within Us by Trisha Levenseller. This was another disappointment. It wasn't a big disappointment in terms of my last one, and I say that because, first off, Trisha Levenseller, I love Daughter of the Pirate King. I love that series. Shadows Between Us was my least favorite book that she's ever written. I liked The Shadows Between Us, which is book 1 for this duology. But the way, it's like kind of like a darker romance type story. And I'm not big into romance stories. The Shadows Between Us was funny. Like, it had some really comical situations with our character and some of the scenes that happened in book 1. This one we're like in her sister's point of view, which I was surprised. I didn't know that. Completely went into a different direction than I could even have anticipated, that I thought. Not at all what I wanted, what I needed, what I like to read. This was a disappointment considering it is Trisha Levenseller, but it is what it is. I didn't like the story. Next up, DNF number 4, The Living Sea of Waking Dreams by Richard Flanagan. And my last DNF number 5, was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Let's jump right into the stories. Book number 1, The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. This I gave 2 stars. I'm actually going to read the Goodreads premise for this because I think it does it justice. You won't want to leave until you can't. Half hidden by forests and overshadowed by threatening peaks, Les Sommets has always been a sinister place. Long plagued by troubling rumors, the former abandoned sanatorium has since been renovated into a 5-star minimalist hotel. An imposing, isolated getaway spot high up in the Swiss Alps is the last place Eileen Warner wants to be, but Eileen's taken time off from her job as a detective, so when her estranged brother Isaac and his fiancée Laurie invite her to celebrate their engagement at the hotel, she really has no reason not to accept. Arriving in the midst of a threatening storm, she immediately feels on edge. There's something about the hotel that makes her nervous, and when they wake the following morning to discover Laurie is missing, Eileen must try her instincts if they hope to find her. Must trust her instincts. With the storm closing off on all access to the hotel, the longer she stays missing, the more the remaining guest starts to panic. High hopes. High hopes. It sounds great. Sounds like, again, atmospheric, isolated location. It just failed. It failed in the execution. You want to know why it failed? I'm gonna tell you why it failed. We are in a hotel that was previously a sanatorium, okay? Someone in their quote-unquote right mind thought that that was a great idea. There was only snippets of mentioning the history of the sanatorium, and then at the end, like, our culprit was trying to tie in different aspects of the past with like the patients from the past into the storyline. What I wanted from this, because of the fact that it was a sanatorium, this story, not only should it have captured the atmosphere better, it didn't. I mean, obviously you're trapped. No one can get in, no one can go out. You're outside a little bit. That's not enough to capture atmosphere. Like, you really need to feel the blizzard, and it needs to be encompassed in the actual mystery. The biggest gripe I have with this story is that it did not become a more of a like paranormal, it should have been more of a paranormal story considering the history of this place. Paranormal mystery, gothic elements is where the author should have taken this story. You just didn't feel that this place was a sanatorium at all. It literally did not feel like a sanatorium unless it was verbally mentioned about anything from the past. You could have had a completely different story. Where the story actually went was actually very anticlimactic. I wasn't thrilled. I wasn't in suspense. I was just like, where is this going? What are we doing? Why this? And I was so stuck on the fact that it could have been something completely different, which would have made it better. 2 stars. And it's only getting 2 stars because of the idea of it. And yeah, really the idea. All right, so book 2 through 10 was actually, I'm in the middle of reading the Stephanie Plum Bounty Hunter series, and book through 10 are the continuation of me going through this series. So I will quickly go through them now. I got in the Stephanie Plum series, I got up to book number 14. So it's Hot 6, 7 Up, Hard 8, To the Nines, 10 Big Ones, 11 on Top, 12 Sharp, Lean Mean 13, and Fearless 14 by Janet Ivanovich. Again, just because this is such a long series, each book we're following our main character, Stephanie Plum. She is a bounty hunter working for her cousin Finny. Each book is like, it's like if you're watching a TV show, it's just like an episode. Each book is its own episode in the life of Stephanie Plum, and she attracts danger. She draws trouble to her like a magnet, and it's set in New Jersey, so you have the typical New Jersey environment. You have sarcasm and banter. It is just shenanigans, constant shenanigans left and right. The characters are great. I love it. I'm clearly on book 15 right now at the time of making this video, and there's like 32 books I think in this series total, and I'm still on the train. Choo choo, still going. Book number 11, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is book 1 in the Letters of Enchantment duology. I gave this one 3 stars. This is like a YA fantasy with kind of like lore. There's like a war with gods, and I'm not going to say like Greek mythology or anything like that, but there is lore woven into this, considering there's a huge war with 2 gods on opposing sides, because the setting makes it feel like it's historic, like it's kind of like a historical fantasy. This is an enemies to lovers. It's not, I mean, it's a romance. Romance is a part of this book. Our 2 main characters, Iris and Roman, they are both rival journalists working for the same paper. They're both competing to have the same position, basically. You know, Iris is more of a loner. She's trying to take care of her mother, who has an addiction. She just lost her brother. He went off to war, but she doesn't know if he's still alive, if he's dead. So she is in this state of limbo and grieving, and very much like alone and not in keeping to herself and not able to talk about these things. And in this, I'm trying to remember, I think for this war, the god of whatever side like chooses you in some way. You get some type of calling, if I remember correctly. It is like a type of calling. Like the magical portion of this was, which is what drew me to it really, all started with her writing a letter to her brother, and they shared a wardrobe when they were kids in their house, and she would slip it under the wardrobe kind of to give herself some type of comfort, pretending that he would receive it. Well, the note disappears and she receives a response back, and it's from an unknown person. Like she's, you know, this is not your brother. They don't tell each other who they are, but they sort of become pen pals. So there's this like magical, what she thinks is a magical wardrobe. The other things happen to dive into that more. But it's like, okay, is this a magical wardrobe where there's like ley lines involved? I think it's like kind of known where these ley lines, wherever like certain houses reside on ley lines, and there are magical things that happen on these ley lines. The problem okay, it sounds great, right? It sounds fantastic. The whole premise is fantastic. The ideas woven throughout are fantastic. My problem with this, the reason I gave it 3 stars, and what makes it just meh, it was okay. Like I liked it, but I didn't like it. I didn't like it because it wasn't heavy enough in the magical elements. It barely touched on those. The biggest magical element that it touches on is this ability, like the notes that are disappearing and, you know, reappearing from someone, like talking to someone in this way. There is no explanation. I'm not gonna say explanation or clarification that dives into the ley lines, the magical histories of how things work. There's a whole war going on with 2 gods going against each other, people fighting under the power of these gods, and that's not even mentioned. There's like a little bit of history about it, but there's no magical depth to it really. It's just like mentioned and that's it. You're not exploring it. And the way the book ended, it touched on it more, which makes you think that in book 2 you're gonna get more of that. But I don't think so, to be honest. My intuition tells me that there may be a little bit more of that, but it's not going to explore what was in book 1. I don't think like the ley lines and the magical history is going to be touched on. I think it'll go more into maybe the gods and their lore, their own personal mythology and lore with them, but I don't think it's going to go into like the actual world and how it operates in the terms of the magic, because it doesn't feel magical. Like the parts that were mentioned, it was, like I said, it's just like verbiage. It's not, you don't really feel it enough. And I forgot I was even in a magical story until like the notes part. I was like, oh, that's right, this is supposed to be a magic like it's supposed to be fantasy, but I felt more like I was in some type of historical fiction story with like fantasy elements thrown in that weren't touched on enough. I really felt like I was more in a historical fiction. There wasn't enough fantasy for me in this. Book number 12, Recursion by Blake Crouch. I gave this 2 stars, y'all. 2 stars. This is a sci-fi, and I had read Dark Matter. I liked Dark Matter. I really enjoyed Dark Matter. This one, I did not. Only reason I gave it 2 stars is because the idea was interesting. Because we're dealing with memory, identity, time loops. I don't like time loops. I am not a fan of time loops. I've said it in the past. I will say it again. Nothing in a book form anyway has changed my mind on time loops. And I don't think I'm going to be reading any story with time loops in it anymore. So with this one, the gist of it is there is some type of memory syndrome that is starting to, I think it just happens out of the blue, and it's starting to drive people mad with memories of a past that they had never lived. You know, we have our main characters who are like scientists, like one is anyway, I forgot the other guy, like his deal in it, but they're like trying to change it and thwart time, and there's time loops and jumping back and in and out of the past and the present, trying to change the future and things like that. And it's just reiterating. It's not a psychological mind bender that was in a good way. The only psychological mind bender that I think I've enjoyed in reading form was Vita Nostra. I've mentioned it before. It's one of my favorite stories. That is a psychological mind bender that's good. It's good. This felt like slogging. I was slogging through. It was like constantly reiterating the same thing. It made me feel nuts. It's not like that was a part of the story where that, like, you feeling nuts made sense. That would even have its purpose in this. No. Book number 13, The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich. This one was another 2 stars. And I had DNF'd this a few months back, and the only reason I picked this up again is because I had recently tried out local book club, and this was the pick of the month, and I was like, okay, I'm just joining this and trying this book club out. Let me just do this because this is, I'm popping in for the first time. Again, my thoughts exactly when I DNF'd it the first time. I gave this a 2 star for good reason. First off, it's a contemporary. I don't like contemporary stories. There is that. If you like contemporary, you might like this. The gist of this one is that, I mean, the premise sounds interesting. I was interested in the premise, which is the whole reason I put it on my TBR to begin with months and months ago. We are following a storyline of all of a sudden one day, a random box appears to everyone, whether you're homeless, in a third world country. Apparently you wake up and there's a box, and inside this box there's a string, and it's either a short string or a long string, and that string is the measure of your life expectancy. Now there is a way to measure the length of the string to know what age you're going to die. There is no details on the why, on how you're going to die and when. You just know the age that you're going to die. Now, the whole theme of this is that some people don't open the box. Okay, well, what would you do? And it's making you think of death, because people don't want to think of death. You know, people don't want to think of life-altering tragedies and how that... the whole shebang. Like, death is obviously the whole theme of this book, but talking about what would happen to the world if everyone knew the age that they were going to die, not even knowing the details, just knowing the age. So there were like different things started to collapse. Basically, people were making decisions whether to know or not know. They were being forced to, like, certain people who were in certain like jobs, their employers were forcing them to at least show them the string, because people, you know, you would get fired if you were a short stringer, because if you don't have a long life expectancy, they're going to hire people that do. There was a lot of prejudice. You know, the short stringers were being shown to be crazy and out of their minds from fear of actually knowing when they were gonna die. The relationships were falling apart because you had long stringers with short stringers, and the whole topic of conversation, which is the book is trying to get across, is that what would happen if this were a thing? How would it impact the world, each other? How would it impact you, etc.? We are following so many points of views in this story. There's like 8 people, I think, that you're bouncing in and out of their lives. So there's no connection. You can't really get attached to the characters at all. You don't really care about anybody. For me personally, I absolutely would. I want to know. I would not just like, yeah, no. For me personally, it would actually help me greatly to know the age of when I would die. I would absolutely want to know that. That would actually be a blessing to me in my life. That's the whole premise of this book. I think the idea was great. I just did not like the execution of how it was written. I think it could have been done. I think the writing could have been better. I think the topic could have been written in a different way. I think it should have been written differently. That's basically what I'm saying, y'all. Number 14, Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Myro. Again, 2 stars. I've had so many 2 stars. It is amazing. This is why I read so many Stephanie Plum novels, because after this I was slumping hard. So you know, Stephanie Plum was my palate cleanser. Ordinary Monsters is actually a well-loved one on BookTube, and it's been around for a while now. It's a fantasy, like, Victorian world. Victorian 1800s almost, like, era type thing, you know, and the audio was 26 hours long, so it's a big one. It's a biggie. I was like, I am really liking this, and I thought that it was slow and intentional. Like, I like a slow burn when it's intentional and it's making you feel how drawn out it is for anticipation. I love slow burn because I love anticipation. I live for anticipation. I'm all about it. However, it got to a certain point where the anticipation stopped and it just was slow. Like, the premise of this is like we're following multiple kids that we're talking about. They have magical abilities, born with magical abilities that are called talents, because this is the Talents trilogy. And there apparently is a school so we have it partly in a school setting. At the beginning of the book, you have these two kids are being chased by, this shadow man, apparently. And then there's lynches in this, and I was like, oh my God. And the only reason I know what that is because I play RPGs, and that's a thing in D&D. Not only was the pacing a problem for me, but it was bouncing back and forth too much between POVs, that the timeline of what is occurring in the events just threw me off, because the premise makes it sound like we're going to be in this school with these kids and we're going to be following the kids. But it didn't feel like that at all. By the time we got to the kids and we were in their, like, we were following them, we weren't even following them. It was just like watching them on the outside from afar, seeing what they were doing, and then going back into someone else. And it wasn't set at this school like you thought. Like, they're there, they run away, and then it's elsewhere. And then there's like a world of the dead, which I had no idea. I didn't like it. I was like, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And the biggest problem I had with it also was that it's narrated. We are not in anyone's inner monologue. It's one of those stories that is narrated to you. And in that case, I was like, I'd rather just watch this as a movie, because in a movie, I can see their body language and I can see details that intuitively I can pick up on the inner monologue. When the acting is good, you can really feel the character and what they're feeling. That's the whole point of it. If I can't be in our character's inner monologue, I can't connect with them. People should be saying that. Like, if you're gonna do reviews for stories, I think that should be one of the biggest thing in the review, is to let people know, are we actually in the inner monologue when we're following our characters, or is it just narrated the entire time? Because if I knew that this was narrated, I would have never even considered this book. Never. The only reason I did not DNF this and I stuck this out was because the writing was good enough to hold me. That's why it held me. And I thought that it's like the second half of the book, I'm like, okay, if I get past the 50% mark where we can be with the kids, maybe I will be like, it'll turn around. But like I said, we weren't even with the kids. I thought, I need to see how this ends. No, it was a big disappointment, y'all. But just know that going into this, telling you what this book holds, what the story holds, so you know going into it. And lastly, book number 15, The Nature of Disappearing by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. 2 stars. 2 stars. These Silent Woods is one of my favorite stories of all time. And I'm written by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. I was like, I love that book so much, I want to read everything else that she has written. This one was her newest release. The one I read before this, I think, was her debut, and I DNF'd it. I DNF'd that one, I gave this one 2 stars. And These Silent Woods is a 5 stars because it's it's one of my favorite books of all time. And my favorite wilderness story as well. The premise sounded fantastic. Let me tell you the premise. Set in Idaho, so we're in the Idaho wilderness and the rivers and that whole scene. And our main character is Emmeline. She is a fishing and hunting guide. I forgot what she was before, but she is trying to start over and start a new life, and this is what she's doing to start over. Her ex from the past randomly shows up because she's estranged from her best friend as well. So like they briefly would talk from time to time, but they were not close from something that happened back in the day with her ex being involved. So her ex randomly shows up and says that Janessa, her, their old friend, has disappeared. And that's apparently the mystery in this story, is like, where is Janessa? We have to find her. And considering the past that she has with her ex, goes from the past and the present of like what had happened. So it's like current, present tense of giving little snippets of like the wilderness and her environment and her life now, and then going back to the past as she like leaves with him to find Janessa, and going through the emotions of the past to the present. The biggest issue with this book, that the environment does not take center stage. If you are in this kind of wilderness setting, it needs to be a character all on its own, and it just wasn't. It was just verbally said. It was just vocally said where they were, but we had no picture or feeling, sensation, emotional connection to the wilderness. And she is a guide. She is a fishing and hunting guide, and you're not going to go into her life and how the wilderness has impacted her life mentally and emotionally. Make me feel that. Make me be in her situation and her emotions, and go out and sit on a rock by the river and contemplate, and like go into the beautiful descriptions of what's happening and how that makes her feel. That thing called emotion and felt sense? Like, let's get into that. She did not. The second biggest problem I have with this is that, and my dad brought this to me because I was venting to it. I wasn't really venting, but I was like, I'm not feeling this. Like, this is such a disappointment. How can you be an author and write this and not like grasp it? And with her, for me, like, she's a one-hit wonder for me. These Silent Woods is like the one-hit wonder. And he said These Silent Woods was a story waiting to be told. With this and the other one I read by her that I DNF'd, it really does feel like she's trying to find a story, and it really feels like it's a rough draft. It's just like an outline, so to speak. But I do recommend These Silent Woods. That is forever. 5-star, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. Wilderness story. I don't know if there's going to be any other wilderness story that tops that, to be honest. That's like my #1 wilderness story of all time. That's my wrap up. And I just got to the end of this and realized that I had a lot of 2 stars. I didn't realize how many 2 stars I had. The only saving grace that kept me from going into a complete slump were all of my Stephanie Plum Bounty Hunter novels. They are always 4 to 5 stars. They go between 4 to 5 stars. I don't think any of them so far have been below a 4. Thank God for that. If you like this video, give me that thumbs up and comment down below and let me know what you think of any of the stories that I have mentioned. I want to know your thoughts and opinions. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button. You don't miss out on any of my upcoming bookish content. And as always, happy reading, and I shall see you in my next video. Cheers.